year, the theme for the APRIGF is Evolving Ecosystem, Enduring Principles, Shaping Responsible Internet Governance. At the meantime, we will also be looking at artificial intelligence and the environment and how we can move towards a sustainable Earth. At the same time, the topic for TWIGF 2024 is to rethink Internet governance from the aspects of artificial intelligence, resilience, sustainability, and security. After listening to Dr. Murai's presentations, I'm sure that we all gain valuable insights into responsible Internet governance and how we can achieve a more responsible Internet environment. Governments, private companies, and citizens all have a role to play in shaping the future of the Internet. It can be a complex and sophisticated process, but it is ultimately essential for ensuring that the Internet remains a safe and secure space for everyone. And now, ladies and gentlemen, after a fruitful keynote session, later on, we will proceed to the opening plenary. In this session, we are going to explore the topic of shaping the Internet through multi-stakeholder governance. A healthy multi-stakeholder governance model is very crucial for the smooth functioning of Internet. It allows the inclusive and adaptive governance that takes into account diversity of perspectives and contexts from various stakeholders. This is important in the backdrop of the constantly evolving nature of the Internet and other digital technologies. The region, as we know, is at a crossroads, with issues related to digital divide and inclusion on the one hand, new and emerging technologies on the other, while also having to ensure the Internet and related infrastructures are secure. As such, we must examine how these intersections impact each other and how these various issues can be governed through a robust multi-stakeholder model. In the plenary, we'll be having a great many exceptional experts to join us for discussions, and we are very excited to hear from their valuable insights. And now, as we are still enduring a setup for our stage, please stay with us and let's be patient to wait for a minute. Thank you very much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, as we are ready to kick off, now please join me firstly to welcome our moderator of the session, Ms. Pavitra Ramanujam, Asia Digital Rights Lead of Association for Progressive Communications, to join us on the stage first. Moving on, please welcome the panelists to also join us. Dr. Kenny Huang, Chair of TWNIC. Ms. Heather Adkins, Vice President of Security Engineering at Google. Welcome. And of course, our esteemed speaker, Dr. Murai, Professor at Keio University. And Ms. Lisa Garcia, Executive Director of Foundation for Media Alternatives. Welcome. We're delighted to have experts, domestic and internationally, to join us today for more in-depth discussions with regard to Internet governance. And now, ladies and gentlemen, as we have our moderator and panelists with us on the stage, I'll hand the floor to our moderator to begin the plenary. Ms. Ramanujam, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to the opening plenary of this APRIGF 2024. My name is Pavitra Ramanujam. I'm with the Association for Progressive Communications, and I will be the moderator of this panel today. And I'm, of course, joined by a panel of experts here. Of course, we have Professor Murai, Lisa Garcia, who's Executive Director of the Foundation for Media Alternatives, Kenny Huang, Chair of TWNIC, and Heather Adkins, who's Vice President of Security Engineering at Google. And thank you all so much for joining us today. The title of today's session is Shaping the Internet Through Multi-Stakeholder Governance. I'm sure everyone in this room agrees that the internet should be governed through a multi-stakeholder model. As our MC said earlier, it really does allow for a diversity of perspectives and a diversity of stakeholders. And I think that's especially crucial in our region because we are such a diverse region in every way. But the practicalities of implementing a multi-stakeholder model, of course, remain, whether it is in terms of competing priorities or the imbalance of power sometimes between stakeholders or the time that it actually takes to make decisions within this model. And as we are discussing the future of internet governance, particularly in global spaces and how the internet should be governed going forward, perhaps there's a bit of wariness about pursuing this multi-stakeholder model. Yet in our region, where we have so many contradictions, where we are excited by all of the emerging technologies and the possibilities that they present for making our lives better, but still being confronted by the realities of the digital divide and of many communities who are at risk of being left behind, it is actually very important for us to ensure that we're trying to get more people into the tent, that we're trying to get more people a seat at the table, and perhaps to reaffirm our commitment to the multi-stakeholder model, but maybe to reimagine it a little bit in a way that it is adaptive, inclusive, and secure. And so hopefully through the course of this conversation, we can unpack a little bit what that means in the context of our region. So I will invite now our panelists to share a little bit their views on this, and I request that you keep your opening interventions to 7 to 8 minutes perhaps, so that we also have time for discussion with the audience later. And maybe I can come to you first, Lisa, particularly because when we talk about the multi-stakeholder model, I think we presume an equality of stakeholders, right? And that is often not the case, both in terms of the discipline of stakeholders who have a seat at the table. Sometimes we find that certain stakeholders like governments or private sector might have more of a decision-making power than civil society or the technical community or academia. But beyond that, in terms of who makes these stakeholders up, there is still continues to be an imbalance of power as well. For instance, whether it is because of geographies or backgrounds or the underrepresentation of certain communities who often don't have a voice in spaces like this. Could you tell us a little bit about your own experience from a civil society perspective engaging at internet governance processes, and also what you think we must do to ensure that it is a much more inclusive space where people have a more equal voice in terms of how decisions are made?
So thank you, Pavitra, for that question. Yes, as a civil society member, part of civil society, we're lucky and privileged to be part of spaces like this, including the Asia-Pacific Internet Governance Forums, because this is a space where we are able to interact with various multi-stakeholders. As you mentioned, there's government, the academic private sector, and fellow civil society members, especially those who are also working on similar issues that we work with. That is important for us, especially small civil society organizations and communities that we work with, because we not get only to interact with them, but at the same time share our experiences, because we've been working on the ground, and at the same time learn from each other. So that's very important for us. And I think being part of processes like this is also somehow a recognition of the work that we've been doing in the area. Unfortunately, as you mentioned, there's also the issue of the imbalance of power. If we look, of course, historically, if you look at processes like the IGF, we have to question who have been participating, who are there on the table. Are the voices actually especially of small groups being heard? Now there are, of course, I'm not saying, Don't get me wrong, I believe in the importance of multi-stakeholderism, but there are many challenges for us civil society organizations and small groups. Yeah, and of course, number one would be the cost of participation. Not all of us, of course, can afford to come to, physically to other countries, no? Because it entails a lot of cost. As I mentioned, historically also, it has not been that easy for women to participate. The participation of women has been low in the first few years, but I'm glad that looking at the crowd here, we have a sizable, good number of women participants. It's also somehow, at times it's also intimidating to attend spaces like this. We're talking about technology, terminologies, the language. It's that difficult. It's not that easy to understand them, especially with how technology has been developing. So we have to understand what those terminologies are. And these conferences are also being held, when we have these conferences, we're using English as a language. We're not all native speakers of English. Of course, the venue would also, I think the venue would also be important to consider in which country is it being held. What's the human rights, let's say, policy of that country. The visa issue is also something that has to be considered so that people from developing countries can attend. And also, of course, we have to talk about the transparency and accountability, which was mentioned earlier. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Can I just ask you perhaps a quick follow-up in terms of what can be done, particularly, for instance, by processes such as the APR-IGF or the IGF, to ensure that there is more inclusion, particularly of certain underrepresented communities?
Yeah, in terms of inclusion, of course, we need more voices, more diverse voices, especially those from marginalized communities. I wish that we can bring them all here. Of course, that's not possible, but you know, yeah, if we can, that would be great. We know that all sectors now are affected by and impacted by technology, by the internet. And they have the experiences, actually, so it would be good if we can also hear those voices that we do not usually hear from. And I'm glad that, you know, little by little, through the years, we've been bringing in diverse voices, especially young people.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Kenny, perhaps I can come to you next. I think when we talk about multi-stakeholderism and an opportunity to discuss many of the issues related to internet governance, we also have the opportunity to ensure that the issues themselves are not addressed in silos because they are quite interconnected. And when we are at a moment in time in the region where we have the opportunity to really take in the possibilities of emerging technologies. And as we are at a moment where we are beginning to regulate them, how do we address them in a way that is actually able to address some of the existing problems in the region? How do we address them in a way that allows us to ensure digital inclusion rather than worsen the digital divide? Or perhaps bring in to the room some of the underrepresented communities, as Lisa mentioned?
Sorry, my bad. Okay, thank you for giving a good question. Basically, for multi-stakeholder, it is not, I cannot call that would be a solution. It's natural evolution from the reality of the digital world, from digital regime. Because the internet initially was starting from, I can say, liberalism. People based on from any source code from engineering background, they try to put up all the source code, put it together, and make sure the interoperability between machines is functionable. So starting from there, So probably Jim Murai is one of them as well. And starting from the starting from liberalism, eventually we just realized internet cannot just based on the goodwill, still need to some sort of governance. The governance need to coordinate with different stakeholders. For example, when we have domain name, we need a coordination for the domain name. And so we need to have a centralized governance system to make sure the system can function and working, for example, like a root system. So gradually we step into the multi-stakeholderism. That's why the initial internet governance entities, such as ICANN, such as APNIC, that was formed under that kind of circumstance. Then gradually, when UN start to advocate WASIS and start to advocate, probably not multilateral should step in, for especially from the government entity or government-related agency. But however, UN still quite liberal. They still try to adopt just mix between multilateralism and also between multi-stakeholderism. That's why for UN-IGF, we still consider quite significant amount of multi-stakeholder model working in the UN. And right now, even a lot of countries, they have their own regulation, not only for example, like for cybercrime, they try to define the regulation for personal data protection. They have personal data protection. So eventually, the country local regulation will also divide that kind of issue. So we have multiple internet in some way. For example, like China have an internet isolation bill. Russia also has an internet isolation bill. So for that particular case, we can see the internet fragmentation happen in some of the country. And not mentioned to this particular country, but even recently, a lot of countries, they try to exercise the internet shutdown. So they probably shut down for a week, for months. Under that situation, we can see the internet basically is not the internet we imagined 20 years ago. We gradually to see the combination for fragmented internet and also multi-stakeholder and multilateral internet that was mixed together to nowadays. But somehow we still try to find the solution from there because basically the critical resource is still owned by different institutions. For example, like GTLD still owned by the ICANN, root system owned by root system community, and address is owned by regional internet registry. So different critical resource owned by different entity. And that kind of different entity need to work together to identify, we all have different policy development process. For example, like APNIC. APNIC has APNIC policy development process. ICANN has ICANN policy development process. IETF has IETF, their rule of defining the standard. So how can we coordinate this entity, work together, and to streamline, to have a common goal, and to smooth the situation to mitigate the internet fragmentation? That's will be the critical issue we need to solve today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kenny. And just as a follow-up, could you perhaps give us some practical examples of how some of these communities are working to use standardization as a model to overcome issues related to internet fragmentation, especially in the Asia Pacific?
There's no simple solution, but basically, we are heading to several directions. For example, technical people try to explore any technical feasible solution from technical standard. For example, just Jim Murai just proposed. Probably we can use our imagination, try to identify any potential advanced protocol to solve some of the issue, to mitigate some of the issue. But also, people from law regime also identify any potential legal framework that can mitigate that kind of situation if most of the country have a common consensus. And so they can try to solve a legal solution from this way, but it's very difficult to find out a universal legal solution at this moment. And also people from intermediary industry, for example, registrar or ISP, they try to identify, probably go through the coordination between each other to mitigate that kind of situation. So coordination become a very critical part. That's why we have that kind of forum, and to discuss a potential cooperation and to discuss potential temporary solution to mitigate that kind of abuse situation. And so I think there are different approach, try to find their own way to identify potential way to mitigate the situation.
Thank you so much, Kenny. And perhaps I can come to you next, Heather, because I think when we talk about issues such as internet fragmentation, I think one of the primary motivations for why perhaps governments are becoming more insular is often reasons of cybersecurity. As we are moving into a phase where more and more we see cybersecurity legislation across the region, and for very good reason, perhaps it is also important for us to consider how such models may not only include the security of systems and infrastructure, but also look at the security of people on the one hand. And further, that they do not perhaps curb innovation or restrict rights while still ensuring that the internet is a secure place. And as someone who has a lot of experience building these kind of systems, could you tell us a little bit more about your experience and also how you think such a model can evolve in the region?
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for having me here. Hopefully this is on, yes. First, I just want to reflect for a moment that the internet was always very much an ambitious project to allow people to connect virtually all over the world and to govern the internet itself through a coalition of agreements with people coming together. And I think it's extraordinary, and I see through the community here that spirit still carried forward. My personal professional opinion on internet fragmentation is that when we fragment the internet, it doesn't make it necessarily more secure. And so when we see people lean into fragmentation as a security option, I think we have to look at that with a little bit of skepticism, because there's still all the hard work that you have to do on the technical side to make that security work well. I will say I think the some of the emerging technologies that are coming through, I'm also very positive about them, things like artificial intelligence. We talked a little bit about inclusivity. I'm encouraged here because the same spirit that brings all of you together to do multi-stakeholder governance of the internet is also creating coalitions such as the Frontier Model Foundation, the Coalition for Secure AI, and also coalitions regionally to make sure that the data training sets for AI, for example, are inclusive of local communities in a way that perhaps you know, a Google or a Meta or Microsoft necessarily have immediate access to data on the ground. And I think that's very important, is that we remember the internet very much is about people. It is very much about the connections that we make and the coalitions we bring together. And I think you're seeing through some of these emerging technologies really commitment to the open standard, the open protocols, and the coalitions that are bringing it together. But just to bring kind of us back to the governance piece a little bit, I think what I see from the governments is a lot of questions to us as to what are the right solutions in the case of emerging technologies. Whether I speak to regulators in Europe or here in APAC, they really want to understand the technology at a very deep level, but also, much like us, are exploring what does it mean to regulate AI? What does it mean to regulate the internet in the modern day and the modern age? And this is where these communities can really help solve some of these questions and help inform governments how we want to operate. And I think this is really important when we think about access, not just to connectivity, but also access to the platforms that allow for communication and allow for innovation, and the ability for these platforms to enable communities to do that kind of work. And this is something we see at Google very keenly in the different places where we operate, that there is a polarity between, you know, how do we want the platform to enable, and how do we also want the platform to keep people safe. And that is a difficult balance, I think, that we are still figuring out. But I think what I hear, again, the most is what would work well. What have you tried that doesn't work? And the recommendations from the community in a very tight relationship with the governments. And that seems to be fairly consistent wherever I go and whoever I speak with. So I would encourage the community, this is an amazing community. Keep those questions coming, but also listen for what questions they're not asking. What problems are coming over the horizon? What do we need to be solving next? And from a technical expertise and a governance expertise perspective, how do we make the best recommendations in the different regions, knowing the different strategies that they have? And finally, I would just say on the question of inclusivity, one of the things we're finding is that we all advocate for the things that we need to directly advocate for, but this is where allyship really matters, and also being able to carry forward the voices who don't get in a room like this, to make sure that we're making those local connections and bringing their advocacy in the room when we are here as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Heather. And I was actually struck by something that you said. And Professor Murai, I'm going to actually pose that as a question to you. Really in terms of, well, what questions should we be asking then? If we are looking towards building a model that is adaptive, that is secure, that is inclusive, in the context of the region, what are the benchmarks that we should be looking at? What are the indicators that we should be working together when we think about building a model like this?
I heard every panelist discussing about a very interesting thing, and then also the answering your question to my understanding from my experiences about developing the internet. Then it's very interesting that when we started the internet, and as I mentioned, then we started to connect the research into universities, and that was us. And then nobody else cares about the internet at that time. But the important thing is that was considered as a communication. And so a telephone company, which is normally the part of the government. And then, so they didn't care much about attention about the development of the internet. And so the policy side is talking about the regulating the telephone, and then they make sure that the telephone could be a universal service to everybody. So that was the responsibility of the public. And then, so the creation of the internet was pretty much free, and then connecting the individual researchers, education, students, and then, that's more toward the citizen side of maybe, right? And the user side of development. And so that bias that time was that, okay, so please, when the internet value was known, then everybody started to think that this is interesting, and then the commercial companies, is going to be taking a lead at least for the deploying other kind of continuous commercial services, right, after the public, academic services, right? So then increasing that thing, and then almost everybody started to understand the internet is, right? Now, the questions we are receiving is something like, we have a LINE is providing the messenger service in this country, or? Yeah, okay. So LINE is very popular. It's almost, everybody using the LINE, including the government people, family people, and the kids. And then the common question is, when we have LINE, do we still need the internet, right? So that is a very common thing. And another thing is that we are working on a optical fiber, and then submarine cable, and for the global internet. And wait a minute, our phone is not connected by wire. And why we still need a submarine cable around the world for the internet? This type of a question, probably nobody in this room is going to raise this type of a question, right? But actually, the many people is questioning about that kind of a thing. So the important thing is the definition of a multi-stakeholder changed from the beginning of the internet, when the multi-stakeholder term was defined, when they say, I can start it, right, for example. And at that time, then we need the government as one part of the stakeholder. We need the operator as one part of the stakeholder. We need the user as one, So those are still us, right? For ourselves. But now today, internet is for whom? Everybody, right? Every single industry. So I'd like to ask, don't need to raise your hand, but how many medical doctors in the hospital management is in this room, right? How many electricity, energy management people? How many from the aviation industry in this room, right? Those industries is now connected on the internet and doing a very critical infrastructure, lifeline infrastructure, providing the services to us, and then they should understand, they should be responsible, or they should participate on this type of a place. So we are still, at the time then we are extending and open and outreaching, but it's not enough now. So we really need to rethink about what's a real multi-stakeholder. It's already limitless, right? So how we can discuss collecting the voices of those diversity of stakeholders for the future of the internet, which is a little bit a different approach might be necessary.
And do you have any ideas, Professor Murai, on what that approach could look like?
Yeah, that's one key issue is, once the telephone was controlled by the international government network, and then the internet was independent and creating the global space, as I mentioned in the morning. And now, because it's for everybody, it's for everywhere. So the public responsibility is getting very strong now. You mentioned about fragmentation of the internet and the national security related to the internet. That's all the government role and the diplomatic role. So the government-private sector individual relationship is has been very changed. So the key issue, answering your question, is very much a collaboration with the public and the private and the individual. So reconnecting those stakeholders in every sector of our industries and the coverage of the services is going to be really important, because digital data is going to be doing the services based on the AI for every single services in the society.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Professor Murai. And thank you to the panel for sharing your thoughts as well. We do have a bit of time now for us to turn to all of you and to ask you similarly for your thoughts on what we could do better in order to make sure that we have a more inclusive, robust, multi-stakeholder internet governance model. So if you would either like to share your thoughts or your comments with the panel, or if you'd like to pose any questions, I think we have time to take about 3 to 4 questions or comments. Yeah, I can see the gentleman in the blue jacket and yourself as well in the white jacket after that. Yeah, please go ahead. And if you'd like to address your questions or comments to the whole panel or to someone in particular, please mention that as well.
Thank you very much. My name is Izumi Aizu. Originally, I had this question to Jun, if I may. As much as I agree with what you said about the need to involve the other stakeholders of the infrastructures, the powers and grids, but I reconsidered it to put it the other way around. Isn't there any need for you guys, us, the IG folks, to go out to their venues, their discussions, not invite them into the internet governance or internet-centric fields? It's very much lacking to me that you guys, we tend to be with us and outreach and include, but maybe we should add. If there's nothing there, we better create. That's what I thought. And I'd like to listen to your thoughts, and if any others. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very interesting and important discussion, I believe. The internet invoked the digital communication, digital data sharing. That's the internet. I mean, now our definition of the internet, we once discussed among the various policy people and the ITF leaders, ISOC leaders in the Yokohama last year about how do we want to still call the internet the whole thing? That was an interesting question because then, the internet itself, TCP/IP, World Wide Web, probably Tim Berners-Lee is always talking about the one web. So a single technology, standardized technology to cover. So TCP/IP and the World Wide Web, the HTML, those are the kind of a single standard space. And then the more multiple competitive new technologies should be, accommodated by those core part of the internet. So should we call the core internet and then different from the internet in general? Because the people think about remember my question about we have a Facebook, and do we still need the internet? That type of internet is totally different. So it might be the same discussion happened in Kyoto. Remember the IGF still, do we want to call it still the Internet Governance Forum or the Digital Society Governance Forum? Type of a discussion I remember that type of a discussion. I think that discussion was reasonable. But in order to do that, then I sincerely hope that the policy maker around the world to understand what the core internet law to be the sustainably supported and operated globally is going to be important. If there is an understanding about that, then I think it's, the internet could be defined as a very much a broader digital society concept. Maybe that might be the consideration. Well, it's very difficult to change the name, by the way. But then, probably Izumi-san's is, no, I don't think internet-centric. It's going to be a key issue for the multi-stakeholder, for the digital technology society. I agree with you in that sense, but in order to do that, then the condition is that what the global responsibility to keep the internet running and for the future.
Thank you, Professor Mori. And I can say that even though we haven't changed the name, certainly many of the issues that we discuss within the IGFs expand far beyond the internet and do have implications on the larger digital society, as you said. I saw that there were a couple of other hands up as well. Yes, the person in the white jacket first, and then over to you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to listen to such an esteemed panelists. My name is Professor Salma Abbasi. I'm from the eWorldwide Group. I have a question, and I'm just delighted to meet you, Professor. The question I have, I personally believe that the Internet Governance Forum is really, really important. And the more the Internet is used and integrated into every sector and every government operation, the independence and the human voice that you carry is paramount. I, however, think the concerns I would like to raise are the issue of safety and security, the issue of our privacy, and the accuracy of the information that travels on the internet. It is important if you look at autonomous vehicles. I'm a professor in artificial intelligence and security, so I'm speaking about accuracy of data. We need the digital connectivity for telemedicine and remote diagnostics, but we need it also for the autonomous vehicles, and we're using it in the weapon systems that we have today. So all of that connected in my mind and heart, I think IGF plays a critical role and should remain as it is with special sector intersections because they all integrate. but not to hand it over to any other agency to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone want to respond to that? Yeah, please go ahead, Kenny.
Okay, I tried to give a little bit comment, but probably not direct to your question. For example, and actually there's a wrong value proposition for the internet itself, because usually people proposition internet as a utility model. If you consider anything is a utility, there's nothing to do with you. You just got to prepare your monthly bill. Nothing to do with you. Anything goes wrong with the utility company needs to take care of everything. But the internet itself was wrong. It's not only utility. Eventually, even a utility company tell you something wrong, you've got to have something controlled by your own hand. For example, how many of you have your own IP addresses? How many of you have your own personal domain name? How many of you, your company has your own AS number? Probably not. That means you outsource the utility to certain particular provider, and eventually, if anything goes wrong by the provider, nothing you can argue about. You've got to take something back by your own control. You can control your own AS number. You can control by your own individual IPv4 addresses. You can control your own domain name, particular domain name. And you also need to know who will be your international or local partner you need to work with. Starting from there, then you will realize everything was connected to you because you've got to build everything by yourself. That's my little comment.
Thank you. I think this is an incredibly important topic, and thank you for raising it. I was particularly inspired by the previous question as well. It's important to remember that the internet does not exist without the context in which it's used. And by that, I think we should think about internet connectivity as an emergent property of all of our current systems. But so is security, privacy, data accuracy, and some of these emergent properties are subjective, and they're very difficult to measure. In cybersecurity, you're either hacked or you're not. That's a little bit of a binary question. But when we talk about privacy and we talk about the questions of data accuracy and training, these are very subjective, and they're going to have cultural implications. It's really the society question that we come back to, and that's inherent in the technology. It doesn't exist without its context. So if you think about data for medical, if you think about data for autonomous vehicles, these are things which we can do hard science on, right? You know whether or not we've got data training that leads to safe cars or to safe medical devices. When we start talking about data that is a bit more subjective, our beliefs, our ideas, that I think is where we are all still feeling around the edges of how we think about that, and it's not a new problem. If you've gone to the library and read 10 books on any one subject, you'll find the 10 experts in the field write different things about their subject expertise. So we still have to grapple with that as a society, and actually within the context of the technology, not as a separate thing. And in the field of cybersecurity, we're just now figuring out that we've had this field of cyber experts that we've been trying to build for a long time, that actually what we need is for everyone who builds the technology to be the cyber expert. It's not a separate thing, it's actually inherent as an emergent property of the system. So.
Okay. I also think that this is a very great question. The accuracy of data is, very much sounds like we create the accuracy in a way by the technology. That's one way, and in order to do that, then we need to define what's the accuracy, specifically, and then so that the technology can support a certain level, and then the very dangerous approach is we need the accuracy of data. So let's not use this data, or that kind of a thing, and let's make a regulation that not accurate data is going to be accessible. Type of a thing is a little bit dangerous. So the defining what kind of accuracy do we want is going to be very important. Another story because Heather cannot tell about this. So I'm asking my students, do you trust Google? And so, when everybody was started to use Gmail, and then the Gmail was amazing web-based mail, and there used to be a more so the kind of a local mail system, right? And then, do you trust Google? And then the students' reaction changed. So when they knew about the traditional internet email, then they said, no, webmail, we don't trust. And then one day, do you trust Google, just like a Gmail? And they trust Google. Well, because a long-time service without the failure of a big one. So they didn't steal the contents and the doing for the bad thing for a long time. So trust needs to be created with a time. And then I finally asked to the Japanese, my specific classroom, so don't take it bad. Which one do you trust, Google or the government? I'm not telling you the answer. But anyway, so the trust is another thing we should create, right? So a proper, transparent process of the kind of a data is going to be creating the trust when we are successfully kind of understanding and make it an open and transparent process. So another thing is that the definition of the accuracy, what kind of accuracy we want. I mentioned yesterday about the height information from the GPS doesn't satisfy our requirement and the accuracy of the data because we want to save the tsunami, and height information is going to be very critical. And then we need a more accurate height information, the location information, not rely, well, this cannot be achieved by relying on the GNSS, GPS type of a thing. So we need, say, 2-meter accuracy of height information in order to save the people from the fire or disaster with a tsunami. If that is a requirement, then what kind of a technology we can provide for that level of accuracy to any data of our life. So this is also doable. And from this point, then that kind of a user level requirement from the saving of people's life from the disaster, and then what the technology is providing today, and what kind of improvement of the technology and the security we can create. So we have a lot of room to work together to achieve that kind of requirement.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I actually, just on the topic of data, before I move on to other questions, actually, I want to come to you, Lisa, because we've heard, of course, about the need for accuracy of data and of trust in data, which are both critical, as our other speakers have said, but often in the context of civil society, we ask ourselves questions like, whose data, right? How is it collected? What is it going to be used for? And so while it is, as we move along this process of making the data more accurate, of building more trust in the systems that use this data, what considerations must we take into account to ensure that the rights of the people whose data it is also protected as part of this process?
Of course, for us, civil society, researchers as well, and everybody, data is very much important. We talked about the accuracy of data. When we're doing research as well in civil society, we look at it's important to ask the proper questions so that we are able to get the correct data that we need, because data eventually would help us in crafting policies if we're working with government in looking at what was discussed, whether we apply it in science or in other fields. But then, of course, we're very much wary sometimes of where, if we're talking about personal data, for instance, where do our data actually go? Who has access to them, and how are they being used? Not all, of course, some of our countries would have their own data privacy act, but not all countries. So there might be some form of protection for the data, but not for all. So I think those questions should be asked also, and do we actually trust these people who are holding our data? We had a discussion earlier during DREPAC about the super apps, the data that are there. During COVID, there was a lot of data, personal information being collected about us. But where are these data now? How are they used? We don't even know. So maybe transparency, as mentioned by my co-panelists here, is really important for us to know where our data is, how are they being used, and are they for our beneficial to us, how they use the data that we provide them.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I know that there were a couple of hands up. Yeah, the person at the end there, and then I'll come to the others on this side of the room as well.
Thanks. My question is related to governance, internet governance in the context of upholding basic human rights, upholding and defending. We have seen there is governments, platforms over and over failing to protect basic human rights in the context of conflict, internet shutdown, loss of lot of human lives we are talking here, either in Myanmar, recently in Bangladesh, in ongoing Gaza conflict and genocides. So we have standards, we set regulations, either telecom, internet companies, governance, the core internet, but again, they keep on failing to uphold their own standards, their own law, their own regulations. So how we can better protect? Actually, they don't even speak up. You failed to do this, you failed to do that. And especially during the shutdown, when most of these atrocities and killings are happening.
Thank you. Anyone would like to respond to that? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's been a while when the UN and the government started to talk about human rights and in a many way, and even relating to the internet access being a human rights type of a thing, and so it's a very much, as you mentioned, then it's a kind of a government issue. Therefore, you feel the kind of a issue that when the government is not properly processed the services, public services, then it's a very much kind of a risk of the human rights through the internet, type of things happening in many places. Okay, assuming that that is a cause of, that is a reason about your question, then I think it's really interesting that that is very much kind of a policy level, diplomatic level of a discussion, and then so one of the way I'm thinking about the bringing that thing to each of the government, because we are from the different nation states, and maybe some of the government officers in this room, but when we understand what the internet space can provide for the human rights and contribute to the human rights type of a thing, and then it's a voice of the citizen to be heard by the nation state government, and then nation state would utilize it. And I'm adding to my message to my government that please use this as a diplomatic process for the supporting the others. So because that's a law and the kind of a protocol among them to work. So utilizing any of the diplomatic process, then we can ask our related policy people to raise words to the related nation state, because not a single country standing alone. They are communicating with others. So it's not that complicated thing, but then sending the voice to our government is probably one of the things this type of a group can do.
Yeah. Please go ahead, Kenny.
Yes, also probably the situation could be even worse than what you imagine. For example, the internet could be disconnected. If you monitor the global internet status from time to time, you will realize actually a lot of economy are unreachable from anywhere of the world. It could be caused by cyber attack, it could be caused by misconfiguration by some stupid engineering, and it could be caused by government order, could be caused by a sanction order. So regarding to that situation, I didn't talk about technical issue. Technical issue can be solved by technical solution. And if any potential shutdown was made by the government decision or even the sanction determined by the court, actually it's very difficult for anyone outside the jurisdiction to interfere to make a decision for them because of the government decision. They try to shut down the internet for any political reason, and they try to shut down the internet due to the sanction. For example, like APNIC and Rai region, we spent quite a lot of effort to dealing with the sanction order, try to translate from the sanction list, convert into the ultimate beneficial owner who own the IP address block, especially from North Korea or from Russia or from some other sanction country. So actually, the situation could be worse than what you imagine. And if that was political decision, I don't think there's a potential better way to solve it. And probably we need to discuss it more a little bit about how can we help or mitigate that kind of situation. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe one or two questions. I know there are, the person in the green and the person at the back after that.
Thank you very much. My name is Fawad Bajwa. I represent Digital Data Pakistan. I've been really intrigued by Mr. Murai's comments, and we live in a world today, moving into, let's say, 25 years of internet governance, that the internet, we talk about cooperation, but we don't realize that over the past few years, we've introduced various mechanisms and ratifications in trade agreements, but we never took the internet as a tool for upholding rights and upholding economic development, upholding social development as a fundamental agreement globally that if any nation wants to cooperate with another nation, there should be sort of a mutual understanding that the internet will never be shut down because it is contingent to the existing of that trade, of having social and economic and diplomatic cooperation. Low orbit satellites, again, sort of gives you hope that maybe internet would become ubiquitous around the world without countries shutting it down and having basic services available to the citizens in any condition. But we really haven't reached that stage, and the forums haven't started talking about it. So maybe what are your comments on this, using the internet as a diplomatic tool, where cooperation was contingent on countries ratifying that they will not shut down the internet, whatever happens. What we've seen in the past few weeks in South Asia really tells you the pain. 20 years of development just goes backwards because the internet was shut down for 2 weeks. Now for them to have to rebuild their nation is going to require a lot of investment and input again into technology and the internet. So maybe we can start revisit, instead of just talking about renaming the internet governance or those kind of things, we should look forward, especially when AI has started creating a new digital divide. And you see that, for example, we're in Taiwan, it has a technological advancement in AI, which many countries in our part of Asia will never catch up to. So there is really a need to use internet governance as a tool for cooperation, rather than just dwelling in the past of internet governance. Your comment, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comment and your question, but perhaps just in the interest of time, we can hear the final question from the person in the back, and then I'll request the panel to respond to both, if that's okay. Yeah, there was one person at the back, I think, who had their hand up.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me the floor, and thank you, esteemed speakers, for this amazing panel. My name is Elia, and I'm a youth ambassador from the Internet Society. And I wanted to draw your attention to a matter that was not widely discussed, and that is the one of stakeholders of marginalized communities. So how we're going to use our tools to identify these marginalized stakeholders and ensure and prioritize their inclusion to multi-stakeholder processes, and how we're going to address the potential biases and ensure that their input is effectively integrated to decision-making frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And perhaps that's a great note to also end this panel as we come to the end. It would be great to hear all of your responses on this and your final thoughts. Heather, perhaps I can come to you first.
Absolutely, thank you. I mentioned a little bit the concept of allyship when we talk about marginalized communities. It's important that everyone take on that responsibility personally to bring those voices forward and to make sure that we're including them even if they're not in the room and the idea is there. I can't speak specifically to the governance processes. On the other question, I think we shouldn't undervalue the power of incentives, and the incentivization to keep the internet on in times of conflict are very strong. We talk about how everything in our lives is now digitized. If everything in our lives is now digitized and there's no internet, those things cease to function. And every society is beginning to benefit from leaps forward in medicine, leaps forward in communication and social connection and other areas, and that's true everywhere in the world. And so I think we lean into those opportunities to help governments, and this is it's not the same everywhere, and not every government is receptive, but I think that we have to create the awareness as much as we can, the importance to communities to be able to continue to have those services wherever they are for just the maintenance of the nation. And actually what we're finding is that, I mentioned segmentation does not create security. What we're finding is that nations that are becoming more and more isolated are actually reopening in some areas where it's absolutely necessary for the sovereignty of the nation to do so. And I think we need to continue to advocate for that and to create awareness.
Thank you so much, Heather. Kenny, if you would like to respond as well.
Okay, just try to recap what was discussed. Actually, the fragmentation is keep happening. And from the other side, the merge of internet also happening quickly. And we can cross our finger to expect that later will have a positive result and can be happen as quickly as possible. Because the fragmentation actually causes a lot of difficulty for anyone working in the internet. For example, like we're talking about internet fragmentation, even the application we're talking about sovereignty AI. And so everything was fragmented. You cannot use the data to create your own model. You got to train your personal data, but none of the people, none of the nation have a sufficient data. None of the people, none of the organization have the adequate resource to train your own data. So eventually we got to develop something as a public good, using the public good to identify could be a digital asset for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kenny. Lisa?
Yes, in response to the question and also my final word maybe, of course, we're all affected by the new technology, the developments, the internet is important to all of us. We're all using it. And it's important to bring in all the voices, multi-stakeholder voices. I agree with you. We discussed that earlier. We have to surface their issues because these voices would shape the kind of internet that we would want in the future especially, but of course without sacrificing our rights whenever we are online. I think if you want to be heard, there are many things that you can do. Number one is to connect with all the people who are here, who whom you can meet, you will learn. I'm sure you will learn a lot from them. And then we also have a synthesis document. Maybe you can participate there so that your issues can also be heard and documented.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lisa. And Professor Murai, the final word to you.
Okay. Yes, this is a final word. Yeah, I was going to talk about three more hours, but yeah, I'm going to stop in here. And then the last word I'd like to share with you is that if you have a concern about the internet governance, and I understand that you are the experts on this area, then please spend time with the children and the youth to understand this space. So each of us doing the 5 children and the youth people, then they're gonna very soon understanding the internet governance and then creating the beautiful future.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Professor Murai, and thank you to our wonderful panel for sharing your thoughts. And thanks to all of you for contributing to a vibrant discussion. I know there are many other questions, but hopefully you have the opportunity over the next 3 days to address them and to discuss them. But for now, thank you all so much for joining.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, once again, a big hand to our moderator and panelists. And finally, to wrap up, may I invite everyone on the stage to join us in the center of the stage for a group photo together. Okay, everyone, please make one step forward. Thank you very much. Okay, let's look to the camera to the front. Okay, wonderful. With thumb up, all right? To wish every success of our 3-day events to be followed. Okay, so we indeed have a very rich, full panel. And once again, thank you, everyone. This marks the end of our opening ceremonies.